Hello and welcome to today's episode of Spec Steppin, where we are stepping through the API spec. In today's episode, we're going to cover FedCM, Federated Credential Management API, and you see the document from the documentation on the screen that you will find at MDN. Now, note, as you can see on the screen, this is, at the time of this recording, an experimental technology. So I would not use this in a production environment, but it is worth knowing. This is related to security and logins and verification of users and credential management. And so I would definitely not use this in a production environment because you always got to be careful when you're dealing with credentials and users and access to sensitive type information within your application. But if you have ever worked with an application that provides a login, there's some simpler ways to do it. Like if you're just doing like a WordPress website, they have it kind of built in, but then you implement tools such as two-factor auth and things like that. But for most websites, that's basically all you need. There's also some things that you can do when you're building an application where you can use like Facebook or Google to log in for using those third parties to log in. And there's also tools out there like OAuth or Auth0. Which you can implement OAuth with. There's other ways to implement OAuth, but Auth0 is a pretty popular framework for security and managing security within an application. I've used it on several applications. It's pretty robust. What this does is this provides standardization of identity providers. So if you have somebody like a Facebook or Google or GitHub, excuse me, whoever you're using, this actually standardizes that way of doing things. Now, if you're using those today, you have they all sort of work the same way, but you usually have to jump through their documentation hoops to do it. The easiest ones I've found to implement is using Google with Firestore and using the authentication within Firestore, which is pretty handy to use. I've done that. But what if I'm doing an application where I'm not using Firestore? And I want to still use Facebook and slash Meta or GitHub or Google for that matter, then if I'm not using Firestore, I have another way I have to do it. So this provides a way to do it that's consistent across browsers. Now, currently it only works in Chrome-based browsers, so Chrome and Edge. Does not work in Firefox, doesn't work in Safari, that sort of thing. And you can see that if we jump down to browser compatibility, it only works on really Chrome and Edge. I mean, there's some other lesser known, lesser used browsers that it works with. So, but basically, this provides a way and methods to do that handshaking where you say, okay, here's the user. What's the user's name? Here's the tokenization process and relying on that third party to do that. So you could integrate this into like e-commerce sites or any sort of site where you have protection on the front end from a back end sort of thing. And so I'll leave it to you, read through the documentation. But let me just jump to the demo. Now, the demo, I don't have it built to actually use a third party. I'm sort of mimicking that. So you'll see it'll kind of tell it, hey, it doesn't work. So here I just have a demonstration that is relying on a third party to basically authenticate who I am as a user. So if I click on this button, sign in with FedCM, it waits for it. I'm simulating that, waiting for that response, attempting to connect, and then it'll come back and say, oh, okay, hey, it failed. Check the console area. It's disabled in flags. Okay. So FedCM is disabled in my browser. That's where it's disabled. But let me just jump into the code, and I don't want to enable it at this point, to be honest with you. I'm pretty anal about security, but let me just jump over to the code and show you, and then you can download my code and you can play with this on your own. If you want to enable flags, feel free to do it. So here I just have some basic content, and the real structure on my HTML is I have this button, the sign in button, and I have the status here and results right here. So and I just have some basic CSS to make it look somewhat pretty. So I'm grabbing the button, the status, and the result here. I have this utility function that updates the display with what the status and the results are and all that stuff. And then I'm just doing a check to see if we can actually use FedCM in the current browser, and it'll update the display. So if it finds those two things, FedCM appears to be available. So if I go back here, just report here. So see, FedCM API appears to be available, even though I don't have it flagged. And then here I have the listener on the button. So it attempts to sign in with FedCM, and then it's waiting for the response. So I'm updating the display, attempting to sign in. That will show here, and then down here it shows waiting for response. And then I also just double check that it's available in the browser here. And then in my try catch is where all the magic happens. So I grab the credentials object that's built in Navigator. That's part of the FedCM whole API thing is the credentials object. And I do a get, and there's a structure to this. If you look at the documentation, there's a structure for the identity, who the providers are, what is the URL that I need to go to get the information from that provider, where the ID is for the relying party ID. Because usually, if you're going to use these third party authenticators, you have some sort of ID so that they know, hey, you're a legitimate one to be able to use our services. And then I'm just doing a nonce with random UUID just to create a token randomly. And then there's also this concept of sign in, sign up, use, reload, where you may have different functionality, different access based on a different context. So I'm providing that object there. And if it's identity, credential type identity, which I'm creating right here, then I'm updating the display. I grab that credential success. It's been received, and then it populates the ID, any of the protocol, and the token that I can use. It's a JavaScript web token. And so if I was using this in a real application, like I'm in my note there, I would send that token to my back end for verification, and then I would create that user session like on my node server or something like that. And then I'm just console logging out, and then I'll just alert, hey, sign in successful. Again, in a real application, I would send that token to the backend server. And this is sort of a bare bones example of what you might do. I might send it using a fetch, a post request, and stringify that token along with it. And then I've had to have some code on the back end that would handle the reception of that API endpoint that I would create. And then otherwise, if it's not that credential type, it says it received an unexpected credential type. Otherwise, I get an error, and it gives me the error information and that it failed. Okay, so now mine should fail because I don't have the flag turned on. So see, FedCM was disabled in flags. That's the console error right there. FedCM sign in failed. Check the console for errors. Boom, right there. So it's a network error. Error retrieving token because I don't have the flag flipped within my Chrome. And so even if I did, it would error out because these are not valid. If I go up here, this is not a valid for my back end. I mean, if I take this and do that, see, it's not a valid. It's just an example. So just a placeholder. So again, this is experimental technology, so I wouldn't use it in a production application, but it does have potential to so that we could be able to handle programmatically our own on our applications, our own integration into third parties, as long as we know what's the configuration URL, what's the client ID I need to send to them, do they use nonces or not, which I would hope they do, and do they have contextual identities and all that stuff. So this, I believe what they're trying to do is they're trying to create a standardization so that we as developers and designers can build these applications with some standardization, and we could easily say, okay, I'm going to create a function and I can use it for Facebook, Meta, I could use it for GitHub, I could use it for Google, or whatever that third party uh, authentication service is, I can use the same function for it, and it's standard across the board. Now, there are pros and cons with that, but I would keep an eye on this one. And I wouldn't use it until it becomes production ready. But it's a good one to keep an eye on because security and encryption and user credentials and all that stuff is something you should take really seriously, because there are a lot of malicious folks out there that wish to take advantage of holes in applications. So, and there's always holes. We're always behind the malicious folks. So if you have any questions, let me know. And if not, happy stepping.